This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to a new season of Adventures in Compliance. This season, we're going to take up the second set of 12 short stories published in the Strand magazine in 1893 and 1894, which were collected in the book The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes was published in the United Kingdom by G. Loons and in the U.S. by Harper's and Brothers. It's the second collection featuring the consultative detective Sherlock Holmes. The Final Problem was published in this series, and that remains one of the top Sherlock Holmes stories of all time, as Doyle was determined to kill off Sherlock Holmes, his most famous character, due to not simply its popularity, but how Holmes in many ways had taken over the life of Doyle the writer. I hope you'll take this opportunity to not simply listen to this podcast series, but also to reread the stories in the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. In this episode, we take up the Adventures of the Reigate Squires, which appeared in June 1893 in the Strand magazine. We're going to follow it with some ethical lessons, and I know you'll enjoy this episode of Adventures in Compliance. In this episode, we take up the Adventure of the Resident Patient, which appeared in the Strand magazine in August of 1893. I know you'll enjoy compliance and ethical lessons from the resident patient. The Adventure of the Resident Patient is another one of those unconventional stories that seem to so intrigue Holmes that drew the brilliant but financially desperate Dr. Trevathan to 221B Baker Street. The good doctor had recently set up a most prestigious medical practice by a man named Blessington, a wealthy investor who suffered from health problems and claims to enjoy the feeling that he has a doctor living close by. He also is enjoying the proceeds of the good doctor's labors, extracting for himself a full 75% of the doctor's earnings in return for his patronage, or investment if you want to look at it that way. The arrangement went smoothly. However, Trevathan became concerned about his benefactor, the good Blessington, as he became schemish, nervous, agitated, and whenever Trevathan tried to determine a cause, he was brushed off with a vague story about a burglary Blessington had heard about somewhere in the city. The situation worsened after a new patient began attending the practice, a Russian nobleman whose son dutifully delivered him to the doctor's office, then waited patiently in the waiting room for his father to emerge. During this time, it seems the son took upon himself the time to visit Blessington's rooms. Nothing was stolen, but Holmes was intrigued, even more so when they arrive at the address with the good doctor to find Blessington waiting for them with a loaded firearm. Clearly, we went from agitation to paranoia. But when Holmes attempts to get some answers, Blessington clams up. He simply mentions that a large amount of money is hidden in his room and refusing to answer any questions about the mysterious Russian. Of course, Holmes has no intention of allowing the mystery to end there. He is convinced Blessington knows exactly who the two Russians are, and he believes that they have come to do Blessington harm. This is, of course, what transpires as the next morning Blessington is found hanged from a hook in his ceiling. It is suicide, assumes Trevathan, but Holmes determines it was murder. 3 other men were in the room when the deed was done, and Holmes has a strong suspicion who they might be: the 2 Russians and a page whom Blessington recently employed. A visit to the archive at Scotland Yard fills in the rest of the story. All 4 men were once a part of a notorious gang of bank robbers, captured only after Blessington turned informer following a raid in which a bank caretaker was killed. One of the gang was executed for the murder. The others received 15 years jail time. Released at last, they immediately went after Blessington as the man who had ratted them out. The Russians were not Russian at all, but merely common English criminals with a flair for exotic accents and a gift, too, for disappearing. Although the page was arrested, there is little evidence which to connect him and the other pair simply vanished. Scotland Yard had reason to believe they were among the victims of the wreck of the steamship Nora Siena off the Portuguese coast sometime later. But no one knows for sure, not even the great Sherlock Holmes. What are some of the compliance and ethical lessons from the adventure of the resident patient? Well, let's start with compliance first. How about due diligence in the business relationship? Dr. Trevathion went into business with Dr. Blessington without doing any due diligence on his background. While he himself may have not been able to uncover the sordid history of Blessington in terms of being part of the theft and robbery gang, certainly others may have been able to do so, particularly Holmes or Watson or someone else who specializes in background due diligence. Second is the fee arrangement. Trevathion was a very good doctor, but apparently had little to no resources, so could not set himself up in a nice enough surgery and needed the monies from Blessington, who took 75% for his cut. Number 2, trust but verify. The good Dr. Watson initially trusted Trevathion's stories, yet he felt the need to verify the facts to investigate further. And obviously in the world of compliance, you always have to channel your inner Ronnie Reagan and trust but verify. So this means you need to monitor. This means you need to occasionally audit. It means that even if someone tells you something, that you should always make sure that what you're being told is in fact the truth. Next up, reporting and correcting issues. When Dr. Watson uncovers the ethical and legal issues surrounding Trevathion case, he took steps to rectify the situation and report the wrongdoing. This really is a precursor or presages the modern reporting system. And it's not simply just a reporting system. It is having a hotline which intakes. It's then having people to triage the problem and respond to it. It's having a wide variety of then responses, whether they be changing, whether it be termination, whether it be a root cause analysis or others. So it's an important issue to consider from this case for your compliance program. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review to Adventures in Compliance, wherever great podcasts are listened to, or perhaps even on YouTube. I also hope that you will take this opportunity to reread some of the great Conan Doyle short stories found in the collected works, the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. If you'd like to take a deep dive into a particular short story, I'd love to visit with you. So please give me a shout at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Adventures in Compliance is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. I hope you'll join me again on our next episode where we take up the affair of the Greek interpreter. We take a look at ethical issues, compliance issues, and leadership issues from this great Sherlock Holmes short story from the Memoirs of Sherlock.